Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and right now we are looking at the Meep Eldrazi. This is one of our 2 donation decks of the week, and this deck comes to us from Lexa, who said, "You said I could play Eldrazi in this deck, so I made Eldrazi Meep. Please enjoy." And I do enjoy. I think this deck is a great idea, and has turned out pretty good, all things considered. That being said, I feel like just like the last kind of Kindred deck we looked at, we are on the cusp of a new set coming out that's going to give us a bunch of new options. So once again, we have a bit of a tentative list coming out. Still, there's a lot to think about, a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So it hasn't been that long, but who is the Meep, and why are they our commander in our mono-black Eldrazi deck? The Meep is a 3-mana 0/4 alien. 2 abilities. The first one is a ward ability that says pay 3 life for the ward. Nice and simple. But the main ability of the Meep is whenever the Meep attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX, where X is the sacrificed creature's mana value. So that second part is kind of a mouthful, so I'm going to go over again as we did last time and kind of point out the subtlety of this ability. The main thing to think about is, unlike a lot of different cards, this isn't a card that boosts, creatures, it transforms them. So whatever the creature was before, it goes from that power and toughness into what the new one is. So generally, with that in mind, creatures that have 0 or close to 0 power are the ones that'll benefit the most. And then after that, the other thing that's kind of noteworthy is that this ability is not triggering off of the sacrificed creature's power, it is the sacrificed creature's mana value, or CMC. And because of that, we have kind of like a narrow subset of creatures to look at. So when we did our first episode on the Meep, I had suggested that an interesting kind of direction to put the deck in would be with using cards that are Eldrazi. And I'm going to find the one I wanted to use that I made kind of a big deal about, and I still think is a really interesting addition for a deck like this, and that's Dread Drone. See, Eldrazi come with 2 sides to this that I really like. The first half is Eldrazi's are generally very high mana creatures, and therefore their transformation to the board when they attack, or so when they're sacrificed, is nominal, right? Dread Drone is a 5-mana creature, all your creatures become 5/5s. The other thing that's really interesting is they have Eldrazi spawn tokens, or Eldrazi scion tokens. And these tokens, spawn being 0/1s and scions being 1/1s, are very, very small tokens. They're 0/1s or they're 1/1s. 0/1s being the smallest token that's a creature you can get. Now, creature that you can get that doesn't instantly die, I should say, but still, they're very small, and they have the added benefit that they are little treasures. They can be sacrificed for colorless mana at any time. Really, really cool, and very, very strong. So using those with the Meep sets us up to have a deck that is very, very functional at both like having a large army that we can turn into really big creatures, and having a very decent backup plan, because should the plan not work out, you just summon Eldrazi, and that tends to work really, really well. Looking at our curve, we've got something a little bizarre going on. Our curve goes for a really, really long time, and at first that feels kind of like a problem, but we have to remember a lot of these cards aren't accurate to where they are on the curve. Cards like Shadow of Mortality get reduced. Let's see, both Emrakul's can get reduced, Ancient Stone Idol gets reduced, Abundant Maw, Distended Mindbreaker can both be emerged, Gorix gets reduced, Death Rattle, Writhing, all of these ones right here also get reduced. So our curve is a little trickier to look at than it seems. This is sometimes that I do like renumbering, because Moxfield allows you to change the mana cost on these cards. Sometimes I don't usually like it because it feels kind of overconfident to do so, but it does help you get a better idea of the curve and what it kind of looks like. I will note our 3 mana area feels a little clumped up for a deck that really wants to cast the Meep. Now I'm going to have some suggestions there to kind of alleviate that, but I will say there's a few that I'd like to cut, and I wanted to point them out right away. I feel that starting with, Crowded Crypt, even though it is a very nice creature, like a token generator, at 3 mana as a mana rock, I feel like it's just a little too cute. We should just be playing a 2 mana rock instead. Are we already playing Arcane Signet? Nope, we should just be playing Arcane Signet instead. I know this is more on flavor, but we got to cut down on the 3 mana. Likewise, Palantir feels very, very cute here. Like, don't get me wrong, I really like the idea of, flipping over some Eldrazi, but even with all of these cards, no, you know what? I like this. I'm gonna, especially because I wanted to put some reanimation cards at the end. So okay, we can keep this for sure. But Phyrexian Arena and Cemetery Tampering, I think I'd be happier if we just had different versions of these cards. Like, Phyrexian Arena should probably be Greed, or it could be Dark Confidant, or something like that. Just something that isn't a 3 mana. And Cemetery Tampering is cute, but I think still it doesn't really fit in what we're doing. Even though I've said, like, I'm interested in putting in reanimation cards, this isn't the way I want to do it. The Palantir is much better at it, and I think I like it more. But going back to the Palantir, is anyone going to let you mill when they know you're an Eldrazi deck? Probably not. You're probably going to draw every turn. All 3 of these cards are suspect to me, I will say. Let's just leave it at that. I wish Palantir is not able to. Cemetery Tampering is also difficult too, but Phyrexian Arena, at least we can make a Greed or Dark Confidant and just take it off of that 3 mana. The other 2, I think I would cut for sure. Speaking of mana, 35 feels a little low. I'd rather go a bit higher and go at least 36, 37. We are trying to cast Eldrazi, even with extra mana options that I'm going to put in, even with things like Ancient Tomb, it just doesn't hurt to get to a slightly higher number. And if we're flooding, we're probably doing okay otherwise. Speaking of a few other cards that catch my eye, Skittering Invasion feels a little cute. It is a deficit to play this card, especially only off of like Eldrazi spawn, which you wouldn't do, but even then, 7 mana for 5 0/1s is just okay. And don't get me wrong, it feels really strong the turn you're going to attack with them, but without any haste enablers, we're kind of just have to cast this fairly and just wait a turn cycle to take advantage of them later. And I think we could be doing better things at 7 mana. We could be finishing the game. Likewise, Not of This World feels very, very good. Don't get me wrong, anything past here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9, almost 10% of our deck is affected by Not of This World. Would you consider that to be enough? I personally would not. Oh, excuse me, it's power 7 or greater. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, let's just do this. View sort by... Is there no power? View... Oh, I guess not. Yes, this is something I knew. You can't sort this by power. So at a glance, I'm going to say... Yeah, definitely not enough. Don't get me wrong, if you sacrifice something and all of your creatures become, like, sacrifice something at 7 toughness or, 7 CMC or higher, all of your creatures become 7/7s at least, and Not of This World can be used against any of them. I still don't think that's enough. This card is too cute for this deck, and without enough big Eldrazi, and even with a few more big Eldrazi, I think this is a miss and a very, very easy cut. After that, a few other things here and there. Blood Fountain feels a little cute. A few of these creatures here I feel like are a little too in between of our strategies. I think things like Ichor Drinker is just a creature you don't mind sacrificing, but the 1 mana creatures are not going to be sacrificed to the Meep anyways, because all it does is present, making all your creatures 1/1s, which is not just not good, it's kind of a liability. Likewise, a card like Greedy Freebooter, its main idea is that you get a benefit when it dies, and outside of like Ashnod's Altar, we don't really have quite a reason to do this. A few of the middle ground Eldrazi as well, I feel kind of unsure about. I think, where are we? Our Flying Sacrifice one. I just saw you. Bearer of Silence. Bearer of Silence feels a little cute as it's only one opponent who sacrifices a creature. Don't get me wrong, it has flying, which I really like in this kind of deck, but otherwise I feel is just okay. Likewise, Sky Scourer is just grows in power a little slowly. I don't know if I like that. It does once again have flying, but it is an incredibly fair card to play. Something that I just really thought about a little further is Razor Lash Transmorgant. I get that this is a card that we can reanimate repeatedly, but sacrificing it to the Meep does, reduce... It makes everything 2/2s. And not only is that bad because 2/2s aren't great, but for Razor Lash Transmorgant, which is either a 3/1 or a 4/2, the majority of things we sacrifice are actually either not going to increase its power or reduce it, right? I think it's pretty... Actually, with the +1/+1 counter, I imagine a value sacrifice a 3 mana card to just get a good attack in is reasonable. So it would still be a 4/4 because it would be a 3/3 with a +1/+1 counter. I still don't think that's enough. It's like imagining that you sacrifice a 5 mana creature and Razor Lash Transmorgant will only get 2 or even just 1 additional power and or toughness. Not ideal. It feels like we've wasted it on this creature, so this creature just kind of sticks out. Like, we really don't want too many value sacrifices if we can. On the other hand, I really wanted to point out the Silent Skimmer is really, really cool. I do, this is a card that I'm very impressed by as an Eldrazi drone. As a 0/4, Devoid is just cute, but because it's flying in 0/4, it has so much to gain from the Meep. This is the kind of card I really, really like. So this is a very, very nice addition, I think. And there's also, if I remember correctly, there is that 3 mana, it's... my goodness, it's from Shadows over Innistrad. It's from the story from the Colors from Space. Anyways, it's a mana rock that you tap several times, then it flips into a 0/4, and my understanding is when it attacks, your opponents lose life, and I believe it has flying too. That could be cute. It just reminds me of that, but once again, I would have made the same comment that Silent Skimmer is not 3 mana, and therefore I prefer it. There's a few others here. Kozilek's Translator feels once again a little too cute. I don't know how often we're going to use that additional mana, but I don't dislike it. I just wanted to take a little note on it. Blight Herder as well. I would want to test Blight Herder a little further to find out how often you are able to process. I think for sure if you added something like Relic of Progenitus or another 1 mana artifact that you can grab off of Urza's Saga to exile a graveyard, it would be a lot easier. But at the moment, without testing, I'm not sure. The thing is, Blight Herder is fantastic, because if you can process, it's just a better Dredge Drone, right? It's still a 5 mana creature. It makes 3 1/1s as opposed to 2 0/1s. And in addition, it's a 4/5 as opposed to a 4/1, 4/1, 4/2? 4/1, yeah. So the body's better if you don't want to sacrifice it to the Meep. So I really like it. I just want to make sure we can use the processing. I'm also expecting and hoping for more processing cards from Modern Horizons 3, because I really like the mechanic. I used to play Eldrazi and Taxes, which with Wasteland Strangler has a lot of interplay. So I would love if there's more processing and more reasonable abilities to exile your opponent's cards in the mono black. This card is going to get a lot stronger. So keep that in mind, keep it in the back of your head, and as we get cards, I think that card will get stronger. Finally, outside of a lot of these cards that are just generally very, very good, I want to take one more moment to point out Ghoulcaller Gisa, which I think I'm always looking for a deck that she's good in, and this is definitely the deck she's good in. She is so, so strong here. In a number of ways, she's strong here. So I'm very, very much so impressed by her here, and I just wanted to bring note that, I'm very happy to see her. Okay, that's generally most of my notes. I have a lot of additions, and I definitely have more additions than probably cuts, but I think we can definitely make some cuts. We also have, I want to take a moment for Stlactite Stalker. This is a really fun creature, but I just don't think it belongs here. It grows really slowly in Commander, and though it has the most to gain because it is a low mana low power creature that has +1/+1 counters, I still think we could be replacing it with better hits. So let's take a look at some of what I think are better hits. So the first two I wanted to talk about are quick mana. I actually kind of re-edited this video mid taking it to add these in because I was kind of surprised they're not out. And they're Blood Pet and Dark Ritual. I find them both really good here. Blood Pet, of course, supporting a turn 2 Meep, and Dark Ritual supporting a turn 1 Meep. And both of these take a little pressure off of your 3 mana slot because now you have several ways to get 3 mana cards out on curve. So big fan of both of these, and I really like them. And Blood Pet obviously can grow into a big creature and attack later in the game. So even if you don't use them as intended, you're pretty happy. All right, let's go into the other additions that I started with. Okay, notably missing is Forsaken Monument. Actually, I want to pause before I go any further. I have a lot of cards in my editions that are definitely $5 to $10, so I will take note of that. There's not much else when we go into a hyper-focused kind of either kindred group or a strategy, and especially in a color it's not regularly in. There's so few mono black Eldrazi decks that we're kind of very limited. Sometimes we're going to have to pull out more expensive cards to shore up some weaknesses or have access to abilities that otherwise we wouldn't have to. So Forsaken Monument is definitely one of them. I actually didn't say Eldrazi Monument, but that could also be one. But for now, I'm going to say Forsaken Monument. Very, very strong. Obviously, it allows us to double on some of our mana, especially some of our mana rocks and the wastes. And then boosting all of our creatures that are colorless is very, very good. Of course, as you know, if you change base power and toughness, this +2/+2 is added after the fact, so your creatures don't shrink after you use the Meep's ability with this. So that's really, really good. Another one that I really noticed, because I was looking at creatures to sacrifice, and I noticed that Amass is really, really interesting. Now, you already amass Orc 1 with Orcish Bowmasters, which is one of the strongest cards in EDH, if you ask me. So even though we have 2 amass Orc 1s where you usually just want the one in your deck if you're going to take advantage of it in the way we are, it's still okay just because Orcish Bowmasters is so strong. But looking at this solo, and if anyone's playing the Meep generally, I think this is a kind of a free addition because with token, because that's a 0/0 token. I guess that's something I didn't say earlier, and it's making sense to me why Ichor Drinker is in here now, because the incubate creatures are 0/0s with +1/+1 counters. There we go, that makes sense now. And because of that, they grow really well with the Meep. That's fantastic. Easterling Vanguard is just a 2/1 for 2 that amass Orcs 1, so whatever that token becomes after the Meep, it will be 1 stronger. Very simple, nothing too fancy, but just an interesting card I wanted to know. All right, let's talk about some Eldrazi that I feel are missing. Oblivion Serwer is a card I really, really like. We need ramp in this deck, and we're going to need to borrow some ramp from our opponents. This is just a very, very decent creature. Not only is it a 5/8 for 6, which is great stats, it has a very good cast ability, and it's very good to sack at 6 CMC, and just generally good. I don't think there's much else to say about it. It's not very flashy. If you go more into processing and more exiling your opponent's libraries and the like, this gets better. Once again, we'll wait for MH3 to find out. But until then, I think this is just a solid Eldrazi to include. The other one that I think is very notably missing is It That Betrays. When we are in black, when we are using things like Sheoldred's Edict or any other black sacrifice abilities, It That Betrays is just phenomenal. Unlike a lot of the other Eldrazi, It That Betrays is very, reanimatable. It's very easy to cheat it into play. You don't really mind it. It's very, very strong. And with that in mind, I think playing this is pretty free. We do have to cast it. We don't have a lot of reanimation at the moment, and up to you to how deep into reanimation you'd like to go, but It That Betrays is such a beast. And on the right kind of board states, your opponents, if they can't deal with it, you're going to get enormous advantage. So this is a card I really, really like. Going into ramp, I want to talk a little bit more about ramp because our options for ramp are kind of not ideal. We're in black, and our ramp options have definitely improved over the last little while, but we're still limited without green. So I want to use some interesting ways to ramp in this deck. And unfortunately, a lot of them are a little more expensive. This is mainly where the price tag is on the deck, so I'm going to suggest them and leave them up to you. Bitterthorn is very notable because Living Weapon is a 0/0 token. Much like I talked about earlier, that is actually the best token you could be using with the Meep. So this is just one, a very, very good card, but also a good card that has incidental, advantage with our commander. I don't think there's anything else to do. I really like this. I also like that this can grab wastes. That's kind of notable. And because of that, I think it's a strong inclusion. Another colorless ramp card that I do like that also works with our commander is Ugin the Ineffable. Not only does this easily cut down on the mana cost of all of our Eldrazi, and thankfully this is only a few bucks when I thought it was much more, but it also creates small tokens. And these small tokens not only are great to attack with or sacrifice, because no matter what, they're going to get us the card that's underneath, and I really, really do like that. Then the -3 is just fine, it's just gas. It's just a very easy inclusion in a deck that doesn't mind getting to 6 mana to begin with. Looking at the black ramp options, Black Market is just very powerful in a deck that likes sacrificing it. It's sacrificing its creatures, or swinging in with huge armies. Black Market just it represents such a swing in mana on the next turn after you play this, that if it doesn't get interfered and enough combat happens after, you get in a position where you can just start hard casting all of your Eldrazi, or if the Meep has just gotten out of control of command tags, Black Market's there just to pay you that mana back. And when you search Black Market, you always get Black Market Connections, which is once again another pricey card, but has several modes that we really care about. This card is just insanely powerful no matter how you look at it. All 3 modes are just very, very relevant to the deck, but I do like that these are technically, Eldrazi tokens. I don't know to what degree the 3/2 Eldrazi tokens, which is actually a token type, matter to this deck, because as mentioned before, when your tokens have 3 power, you're basically subtracting 3 for anything you sacrifice with the Meep. Even then, I think this is still worth playing, even if you just use these first 2, which I generally do. I generally use just the first 2 as much as I can. Something else that I thought was very, very missing, especially as it's only 20 cents these days, is Lethal Scheme. Lethal Scheme is fantastic because you can tap at least 2 Eldrazi spawn in order to help cast this, and I don't believe you can overpay for this, which is a little unfortunate, but still, it's incredibly powerful to just turn at least 2 of your Eldrazi, like Scions, Eldrazi Spawn, into 1/2s at least, with the +1/+1 counters being very useful as it grows, just like everything else I've said about +1/+1 counters. But generally just a fantastic card. I also think this deck can really, really pay from that, ideally the 4 connives you get out of this. But even then, I think this is just a very, very strong card. So overall, a good addition to the deck, and pretty cheap if you can get it at that price. 2 cards about board clears, and now I'm realizing the second one doesn't work. I wonder if I still want to suggest it, but let's start with Flaying Tendrils. I just wanted to point out Flaying Tendrils because Flaying Tendrils very nicely dodges your own removal, your own creatures, because of how the Meep works. With the Meep, we can just grow all of our creatures into 4/4s, 5/5s, whatever, go for an attack, and then we can Flaying Tendrils after, cleaning up a bunch of creatures. This also works in the opposite way, where if we want to attack with someone who has a bunch of blockers, we can grow our creatures. Actually, we can't. We grow an attack. Yeah, it only works that way. So maybe I dislike this card a little more too, but it is an Eldrazi card. It's like a weaker Toxic Deluge. I think it's worth considering as an option, and yeah, I think that's just fine. Consume the Meek. I thought this was power for a second. This is on me. I forgot. This is one of my favorite cards, and I forgot what it does. You know how it is. Consume the Meek's great. If you want to play in Eldrazi flavor, this is something to consider, especially when you get to the phase of the game where like most of your creatures are dead except for Eldrazi. This can be incredibly powerful. You can think of it as a, you know, not a one-sided board wipe, but a, you know, what did I used to call them? An uneven board wipe, let's say, where you lose your weaker creatures but you keep your bigger Eldrazi. At instant speed is really, really strong, but now that I've actually read the card, I'm a little less impressed by it, and I might just suggest don't play them. Don't play this unless you're really deep on the flavor, which frankly I would be. Another card that is not on Eldrazi theme, but I think is definitely worth playing with these Eldrazi, especially these Eldrazi tokens, is Merkwoodbats. Merkwoodbats is just very, very powerful. I'm like more than sure you're not playing it. I just had a moment that I should double check. Oops. Yeah, okay, good. Merkwoodbats is just very, very good here. I think it represents such a large amount of damage very, very easily. And the fact that it's specifically Sacrifice, which all of the Eldrazi spawn can naturally do, the spawn on the Scions, is just really, really fantastic. This just represents a gradual life gain, life loss swing towards all your opponents. Like turn after turn, you're making more spawn and Scions, and your opponents are losing life. And then, as long as you have all of those tokens, they represent a huge swing whenever you want to hold priority and just sacrifice a bunch of them, right? And I don't think your opponents can even interact with the sacrifice because they are mana sources, but obviously they can interact with this trigger going on the stack. So still very, very strong card, and I do very much like it here. Going into the Reanimation, and these are the last cards I wanted to add, we've got a budget option, and then we have Rise of the Dark Realms. Now this card just got reprinted. It's a lot cheaper than it used to be, but it is still very expensive at, you know, $10 to $25, and very, very cleanly, you know, 9 mana, reanimate everything. Lich Knight's Conquest is also notable at only hitting your own graveyard, and you have to sacrifice tokens for it. Now you can do artifacts and enchantments, but for you, most likely it'll be tokens. Still, both of these kind of interest me because it allows you to turn one board into another. If we're keeping the self-mill, if we're sacrificing cards, if we're like messing around with our graveyard, especially if we do more so, these cards are really interesting cards to pivot into because I really like the idea of trading my smaller creatures into Eldrazi. Notably, Rise of the Dark Realms, I think, is just incredible. If you have this one, play this one, because its ability to not just close games at 9 mana, but our ability to get all of our creatures back instead of just a selection of them is just so powerful because almost all of our creatures are worth bringing back. Even the Eldrazi that don't have ETB triggers, they have cast triggers, we're still going to be so happy to get extra copies of. So, you know, Oblivion Serwer is still a 5/8. And then our ability to later attack, sacrifice these creatures, we're going to be very, very happy. So those are generally my additions. I think that's it. Yeah, and that's what I want to say with the deck. I think it's in a really good place, honestly. I think we're just going to have to wait for this set to come out, that we can look at this, you know, Emrakul, the World Anew looks really, really cool. We don't have any way to trigger Madness, but I didn't think that was particularly important because at this point, we're just looking at an awesome new card, and we're going to see what support comes out. But with all of these really cool cards coming out soon, I imagine we're gonna get I hope that Lexa sends me this deck again, and we're gonna get another draft out. Okay, I think that's all I have to say. Thank you so much, Lexa, for sending the deck and supporting the channel. I'm really excited to see where this goes. Eldrazi is just one of my favorites. Kindred groups, monsters, abominations, whatever you'd like. As I started in World Wake, and that initial seeing Ulamog's Crusher as an 8/8 for 8 blew my mind, and since then I've fallen in love with the creatures for sure. So I'm excited to see what happens with this. I also want to see what other non-traditional Eldrazi decks will be starting to be made. This is the last thing I'll say before the end of the video. Whenever we have like a Kindred tribe that comes out, and we've got like what, you know, that new that colorless Eldrazi legendary from Commander Masters, or like Morphon or whatever, these kind of generic, hey, I'm great for Eldrazi commanders, I'm kind of bored of them, honestly. I really like something that when we see like the Meep and we're like, oh, we can make this Eldrazi. Or what I also saw Tveshsat being an alternative, very similar, you know, Eldrazi commander. And that's so cool to me. Like, I really, really like that. And so I hope we get a few more niche kind of non-Eldrazi commanders, or more directions we can take the Eldrazi in soon. But until then, good luck and happy deck building. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.